Welcome to Beyond Generations, a journey of a Japanese student in Seattle, discovering what happened to Japanese American people in Seattle during World War II, and how people have been trying to acknowledge, understand, and learn from it, and figure out how to connect it to the future. I am your host, Monica. This episode is about an owner of a hotel in Seattle's International District. There you can see firsthand some of the belongings that Japanese American people in Seattle left when they were uprooted and sent to the wartime incarceration camps during World War II. The owner turned the hotel into a living museum so that people can learn about the internment. She did not go through the camp experience herself or is not a Japanese American either, but she devoted herself to it. In this episode, you will find out why.
Japanese Americans in Seattle had to quickly leave their homes in 1942. They were allowed to take only what they could carry. The government then shipped them to internment camps in other states where they lived in horrible conditions for years. Seattle's flourishing Japanese American community was wiped out almost overnight. That's because President Roosevelt forced more than 120,000 Japanese Americans on the West Coast into internment camps due to a growing fear Americans had of people of Japanese descent in response to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. There is one place in Seattle where you can see firsthand the belongings that some Japanese American people left behind. They were hoping to come back to Seattle once the war was over, but they were not able to reunite with their personal items. Monica, an international student from Japan living in Seattle, will take you there.
Just 2 blocks away from the famous Red Chinatown Gate in International District in Seattle, there is the Panama Hotel. This is a hotel where many Japanese Americans left their belongings just before they were sent to the incarceration camps. I had to come here. I didn't know the incarceration happened to people in Seattle. I didn't know, although I am Japanese. Jan Johnson is a current owner of the Panama Hotel. Her passion for art took her to Italy earlier in her life, when and where she became interested in history.
So I became very interested in history, and I could see where architecture had been repaired or bombed out, farms and the beaches had bunkers from World War II, and I thought, well, gee, we were in World War II, how come I don't know anything about it?
When she came back from Italy to the US in the 1980s, she lived in a studio in the building next to the Panama Hotel. It was how she got to know the hotel and eventually the owner and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Hori. John was impressed by how meticulously and carefully designed and built the 5-story brick building was. She saw a beauty and efficiency in the old hotel building built in 1910. And she saw the belongings in the basement.
I thought, wow. And it had the bathhouse. I saw the bathhouse, and I saw the trunks in the basement. And Mr. Hori told me what that was about when they went to internment camps.
She also saw a historical significance of the trunks in the basement that Mr. and Mrs. Hori had not seen.
And I thought, wow, this is our history.
Once Jiang found out that Mr. Hori was thinking about selling the hotel, she knew she had to buy it. She also kept the belongings in the basement. Actually, when Mr. and Mrs. Hori started throwing out the belongings to clear the basement for Jiang, the new owner, Jiang had to run to them and stop them. For Mr. and Mrs. Hori, who were both sent to the camps, the belongings left in the basement was something that evoked their painful memories. Suzan Hori, a daughter of Mr. Hori, remembers when her mother told her about how her family had to give up their family items before they were sent to the internment camp.
She talked about how, she and her family had like Japanese dishes, for example. and how they went into the backyard before they were evacuated, and they broke up all of their dishes, and they threw them away, or they buried them in the backyard. Photos that they might have had of Emperor Meiji were burned. A lot of pictures dealing, with pictures of Japan or even Mount Fuji were all tossed into the garbage. And so it was very painful in terms of having to destroy or throw away your family artifacts and things that, reflected being Japanese.
John, on the other hand, was able to see a historical value in it.
Jan is not Japanese and did not go through the same experience. I think that you have the ability to be a little bit more distant from it and look at those suitcases and all of the things that are in the basement in a whole different light. I think it was really Jan that's tied together the material in the basement with the internment and how quickly people had to be uprooted.
Since Jan started owning the hotel, she basically turned the hotel into a living museum.
I wanted to build a place where people could come and learn.
One of the remarkable things that Jan did was that she turned the old tenant space into a cafe. This place became the Panama Hotel's cafe, where you can see all the photos and maps of Nihonmachi, Japantown, in the pre-war era. This is also the place where you can see the belongings in the basement that have never been reclaimed by the owners. There is a window in the floor of this cafe. You can stand there and look down at the materials in the basement. While Jan runs a hotel with 120 rooms every day, she generously offers her time to tourists, hotel guests, media, and students who ever want to know more about the hotel and the history of Japanese Americans. It is hard to imagine how she gets around to everything she does every day, so I had to ask. But I still do not understand why you put so much effort to preserving all these and tell the story to all these people, because please don't feel offended, okay?
I'm not Japanese.
Not even Japanese. And why is it so important? It wasn't easy at all, right?
No.
You put almost everything into it.
My life.
Your life. The answer was simple and eye-opening.
Well, to me, the people are people, and I couldn't understand how something like what happened in World War II, the internment, how that could even happen. And then they went to camp, and I thought, how could that happen? Because of the way they looked.
In 2015, the Panama Hotel was designated as National Treasure for its historical and cultural significance. And yet, Jan does not think her efforts have fully been paid off.
And I thought, if you keep history alive, you don't repeat it. But that's not the case. We keep repeating and repeating because everybody forgets. And that I don't understand.
Recently, Suzan showed around Jan the headstones of the family graves in the cemetery in Seattle. Jan felt strongly that people need to know the history of the Japanese immigrants to Seattle in its early days in order to understand the injustice of the incarceration fully and correctly.
And they were coming from the middle of 1800. And I thought, this is what built Seattle. And the families are still here, generations. And does anybody know that? They just started World War II. How do they know the impact of that if they didn't know who came here at the age of 16 in the 1800s and did all these things for the city? And then they went to camp and all. It's hard to make sense of that in my mind. How about you?
Yeah, I think all those contributions by Japanese people and all those immigrants.
All the immigrants.
Yeah, made a huge contribution. But one day they were considered enemies. and sent away.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of people in the United States and in Japan even do not know about it. It's so sad. It's wrong.
You're right. It's very wrong. And it should never happen.
Before the interview with Jan, my biggest question was why Jan does what she does, though she is neither an incarceration survivor nor a Japanese American. To her, it's quite simple, because people are people. Jan is right. The history of Japanese American incarceration has to be preserved and passed on to future generations by all of us, with or without Japanese ancestry, so that it will never happen again. Special thanks to Jan Johnson, the owner of the Panama Hotel, and Suzan Hori, daughter of the former owner of the hotel. Music by Zakar Balaha. Join our community on Instagram at beyondgenerations.seattle. Join me for the next episode about some 440 former Japanese American students at the University of Washington who were forced out from the university due to the evacuation order put in place during World War II. Thank you for listening. This is Monica. You have been listening to Beyond Generations. My journey of discovery will continue.